Hi, so today we're going to be talking about some congruent triangles. And if you remember when we were working on the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, we looked at how we would label each of these and which ones would be congruent to which part. So if we looked at angle P, it's the first letter here, so it would be congruent to the first letter there, or angle S. And if you're looking at T, it's going to be congruent to Q. And if you look at R, it's going to be congruent to U, correct. And then we looked at the length of different segments. So if we're looking at ST here, let me erase that and fix that really quick. There we go. If we're looking at ST here, we're going to be looking at the first two here, or PQ. Same respect if it's QR, it's going to be TU. And then if it's SU, so the first and the last, it's going to be PR, first and the last. So that's just a quick review of our corresponding parts. But you've been working with activity with triangles, so you don't have to show, if a triangle is congruent, you don't have to show that everything on the triangle is congruent. There are different, see, it's not necessary to show that all parts are equal. You just have to show that certain parts are equal. And so as we go through this, you might see that you've already seen that with your triangle activity you worked on in class. So the first one is called the SSS. So what do you think SSS stands for? Side, side, side. So what that's saying is if each side of the triangle is congruent to that corresponding side, then the triangles are congruent. So the way that you see they're congruent are by the different hash marks. So one hash mark here is congruent to one hash mark here. And that means that those two sides would then be congruent. Okay? And then the double hash marks, that side is congruent to this side. And then 3 is congruent here and congruent there. And then you could label them. But if all sides are congruent, then that means those triangles are congruent. So make sure you have that theorem written down. Now remember, theorems are just things that have already been proven. That's what the theorem means. So, but you need to be able to use it. I'm not asking you to necessarily prove it, but you need to be able to use it. So if you can stop the video now and make sure you write this down. It needs to be in your notebook. All of these theorems need to be labeled in your notebook with your illustrations. All right, the next one is the SAS. That one stands for, you guessed it, side, angle, side. So that means in order, you have to have a side and an angle in between the next side in order for them to be congruent. So if you look at this rule, it says if two sides and the angle between them in one triangle are congruent to the corresponding parts of another triangle, then they're congruent. So if you look at the picture, we've got this side's congruent and this side, see, a 1 hash and a 2 hash. And then the angle in between those two sides is also congruent. So that means those two triangles, with only knowing those three things, are congruent. So make sure you have down this theorem along with the illustration in your notes for us to use on the activity in class, in your next class. So pause the video before going on and write those notes. Now we have angle side, which stands, ASA stands for angle, side, angle. So that means you've got an angle and the side in between the next angle would be congruent. So in the drawing here, it shows an angle and another angle, and then the side in between them is congruent to this other side. So see that? Angle, angle, and the side in between. So when you're looking at a triangle and you're looking around it, they have to be in that specific order. An angle, a side, and an angle. And the name of the theorem helps you know what it has to be. So for the angle, side, angle, it has to be an angle, a side, and an angle. The angles, two angles in the triangle, and the side in between. So be sure and write that one down And you can pause the video and make sure that one and the corresponding illustration is in your notes. So now we have angle, angle side. So that means the AAS, angle, angle, side. So if two angles and a side not between them, this is the one that's not between them, are congruent, then the angles are congruent. So what you see here is if you're going around the triangle again, you're going to have an angle and then an angle, and then you're going to have a side. And it needs to be in the same order. See, 2 and 1. So 2 and 1 and then the side. So angle, angle, side, angle, angle, side. And then those two would be congruent. So that's AAS, angle, angle, side. And you're going to want to stop the video and make sure you get that written down with the corresponding illustration for your notes. Now the last one is a little bit different. It's called the hypotenuse leg. That's what the HL stands for, hypotenuse leg. So it, number one, has to be a 90-degree or a right triangle. And what it says is if the hypotenuse of the triangle, that's the side across from the 90-degree angle, is congruent, and you have the one of the legs that's congruent, then the triangles are congruent. And if you think about that, that has to be true, because with a 90-degree angle, you're using the Pythagorean theorem, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if you have two of them that are equal, the third one has to be equal. It has to be a congruent triangle. So again, make sure you have that down in your notes with the picture. You're going to have to be able to recognize these as part of the work you're doing in the next class. So let's just quickly look at a couple of examples. And what we're going to do is kind of go through and see what we have here. So we have a side with an angle in between and another side. So this one would be SAS, side, angle, side. All right? So let's look at this one. We have an angle, and an angle. 3 angles. Were there any of those that were angle, angle, angle? So your question should be in your notes, are triangles that have 3 congruent angles congruent? And think about your activity you did, and one of your questions should be, are they congruent? And bring that back with you to class. And then this one was, well, it's 90-degree. So the hypotenuse and the hypotenuse are congruent, and there's a leg. So by the hypotenuse leg, those are congruent. So if you look at the triangles and they have a 90-degree angle, first thing you look for, hypotenuse and the leg, and see if they're congruent. All right? And then one more set of examples. Let's look and see what else we might need here. If we want this to be, this first one to be congruent by angle, angle, side, we have an angle, we have an angle, angle, and angle. What are we missing? We're missing the side. That's what would have to be congruent, angle, angle, side, in order to make those congruent. So in this case, hypotenuse leg, what are we missing? Yes, the hypotenuse has to show us congruent. And side, angle, side, well, it has to be these two sides to be congruent because they are the ones that are connected to that angle. All right, so there's just a couple of examples. So just remember for your notes, you need to have all of the theorems written down. You need to know what they are, and then know what the letters stand for, and know how to see them. Know how to recognize them, just like we did on those last few problems. So you need to make sure you have those things in your notes for class. And I will see you at class. Don't forget to do your Google survey.